Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawalah wa ba'd. Welcome to another segment of Ramadan Revival. Today something important but quick, inshaAllah ta'ala. When we look to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find in the authentic hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kana ajwad al-nas. The Prophet ﷺ was the most generous of people. وَكَانَ أَجْوَدَ مَا يَكُونُ فِي رَمَضَانَ حِينَ يَلْقَاهُ جِبْرِيلٌ. And he would be even more generous in Ramadan when Jibreel alayhi would meet him. Of course, Jibreel alayhi would meet him to revise the Quran, whatever had been revealed to him up to that point. So what we want to take here is something very obvious, and that is that Sadaqah or charity during the month of Ramadan is extremely important. Charity in general is important at all times because people are always in need, and there's always a need to feed people and to assist them because people are going through difficulties and hardships. But in Ramadan, charity is even more important in the sense that the rewards will be greater, and as some of the ulama say, that when you give charity in Ramadan to those who are in need, especially the poor and the needy who are in need of food, for example, then you are aiding them and you are assisting them to do even better in Ramadan in terms of their ibadah or their worship, because otherwise they would be scrambling, trying to find food for themselves, trying to earn so that they could lessen the hardships on them, and so that may take away from their focus and from their attention on types of ibadah that you and I are accustomed to, in terms of reading a lot of Quran, in terms of praying a lot of nawafil, and so on and so forth. So when we assist the people in Ramadan, then insha'Allah ta'ala it's freeing up some of their time for other types of worship, instead of simply trying to make ends meet. So as-sadaqah. Now there are different places in which we can give sadaqah. Of course, the one obvious one is what I have mentioned, that is to give money or to give food to people so that they can actually feed themselves and their families. And we see that today, although yes, we live in a time when wealth is widespread, except that there are parts of the world where people are not so fortunate. When we give sadaqah, let's not forget, the expression that we have. We say charity begins at home. Don't forget to look at those who are closest to you and those who are around you. Look at those from our family members. Look at those who live in our localities. Yes, even in the West, we have people who may be in need of sadaqah. So let's not ignore them, and let's not neglect them. And then we can look further after that. So we have, for example, clear needs in all sorts of countries, whether it be in Syria, whether it be in Somalia, whether it be in parts of Malaysia, where there are people who are suffering and who are poverty stricken. And so if we can find some reliable sources through which we can send money for them so that they can be fed, so that some of their needs can be met, then alhamdulillah we should do that. This is one form of sadaqah. There's other forms of sadaqah as well. There are many, as a matter of fact. But what's going to happen during this month, we know, or what happens during this month, as we know, is that people also have different projects that they are looking to fund. Okay, so helping individuals, this is one thing, and I believe that if we can do that, that is extremely important, because you will get the dua of those people. You will be relieving a burden for those people, and the Prophet ﷺ told us that if we alleviate the hardships and the burdens of people in this world, then Allah Jalla wa Ala will do so for us in the hereafter. So the benefits of that are countless. I was saying then there are other projects. Yes, there are many Islamic projects that are deserving, But here I would like to point out that it is for every one of us to do due diligence. Why? This is your hard-earned money. Of course you don't want to throw it away. You also want to make certain that where your money is going, it is being used wisely and it is being used properly. So if you're giving to your local Islamic center, your masjid, by all means, but make sure also that you hold them accountable. Because sometimes, subhanAllah, we're all human beings. Sometimes people get a little bit loose when it's not their own money, and they don't necessarily take that responsibility too seriously, and so they may spend in ways that that might even be questionable at times. So spend for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Do not be deterred if you hear that there are some fraudsters out there, but do your due diligence. Try to spend in the ways that you know, insha'Allah ta'ala, or in places where your wealth will be used wisely and it will be used properly. These Islamic projects, whether it be for the building of a masjid or the expansion of a masjid or an Islamic school and so on and so forth, all of these are noble causes. All right? But again, be careful. Make sure that it is not given to people who are deviant. It is not given to people who are careless and so on and so on and so forth. Now, the last thing that I would like to mention is perhaps a misconception, and that is the issue of a zakah. Zakah is not a charity in the sense that it's not something that you give, out of the goodness of your heart freely, but rather a zakah is something hopefully you're giving with a sincere intention, but it is an obligation. It's not so perhaps a better phrase would be, it's not something which is optional that you just give for the sake of giving and you're not obliged to give, but rather a zakah is an obligation. We absolutely must pay zakah. And there's a misconception that zakah must be given in Ramadan, or zakah is attached somehow to Ramadan. No, zakah and Ramadan are two completely separate things. Every individual, his time or her time to give zakah might be different, because the time that you that you had the nisab is different from the time that I got my nisab, and so on and so forth. So then it's not necessary that it's going to fall in Ramadan. Now, if a person's nisab, was reached in the month of Dhul Hijjah, for example, okay, in the month of Dhul Hijjah. So now we're going to wait till the next year in Dhul Hijjah around that time to see whether or not they still have the nisab, and then whether or not they have to pay the zakah. But if they happen to if they decide to give it earlier in the month of Ramadan, well, we see why. Is it because they just want to make it easier for themselves, and so now they want their hawl, they want their year to always be in Ramadan, because it's easier to remember? We say, inshallah ta'ala, there's no harm in that. But if they're doing it because they believe that no, it's supposed to be in Ramadan, it's more virtuous in Ramadan, then I don't know of any evidence showing that delaying your zakah or giving it earlier in the month of Ramadan is praiseworthy, or that it brings more rewards. I don't know of any sound evidence showing that. The issue of sadaqah, yes, we have spoken about, but zakah is a whole other ball game. So then, let's make sure that we don't confuse these two issues, and let's make sure that we know where our zakah is to be given. And as for the sadaqah, or and we can call it free charity or voluntary charity, then this is much broader in scope. You can give it in the form of cash, you can give it in the form of food, you can give it in the form of medication, you can give it in the form of clothing, and so forth. I hope that you and I will be amongst those who are generous during this month of Ramadan, as the Prophet ﷺ was. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.